All right. Hey guys, this is Joe Whitcomb. Another episode of Reboot Your Relationship here, and I am with Krista. She is a Marine wife and mother of four, and we have been discussing the trauma, PTSD within marriage, families, and the impact that that has on the relationship. So I'm a trauma-informed relationship psychotherapist. I've been working with couples, military veterans, first responders with trauma for over 20 years. And so this is something I've have a lot of passion about. I was a military person myself with PTSD, and I've had to climb that mountain with no oxygen. So I've been doing all the research and training so you don't have to. So I can bring this to you as a way to help everyone break through some of their own upper limit barriers to creating this safe space and having these safe conversations with one another. And Krista's been generous enough to and kind enough to want to also contribute to this communologue, this dialogue of creating these safe conversations for other military wives, veterans, any first responders, anyone has experienced trauma, and even our own aversive childhood experiences where there's been abandonment or rejection or abuse, any sort of trauma that occurs. And as that also has a tremendous impact on all of us in all of our relationships. So, Krista, thanks for being here on Reboot Your Relationship. Yeah, well, it's good to see you and talk. So you had sent me a text. You and I had worked together with your husband some time ago, and you'd also had been listening to my podcast here, and you had started talking a little bit about the impact of these betrayal traumas, the trauma of betrayals in your own life. So I'd like to just kind of get you to kind of share your story.
Okay.
Because what happened?
So do you want this particular one or going back?
Going back to what got you into seeking support in the first place and getting into and having really taking a stand for your relationship, your husband,
okay.
All that. Mm-hmm.
So we had been married 15 years, and obviously being military, marriage in this never-ending right now conflicts overseas, we have spent many of those years apart, but we have 4 kids, and we had made it through all of those years relatively happy. You have your ups and downs, and you face all of that together, and there's been really tough times with back-to-back deployments and health scares and really difficult deliveries, but we were always there for each other. Then I would say, like, throughout the years, his combat experiences would cause sometimes where his issues would creep in a little bit more than others. And it was usually where work was not providing as much of an outlet for him.
Mm-hmm.
And we would talk about just that factor creeping into our life. And I think he would try and address it or manage that as best as possible. But it was very surface level, nothing that he ever sought help for on his own. So we were just skating by basically on the surface of things. And it was a pretty lonely experience, I think, on my side. You're hoping for your husband to kind of be that man they were when you first met, and you're hoping for your kids to know that man someday.
Yeah.
And so then he had all in the same about 6.5 months, he had a lot of major triggers happen. He had come back from a deployment that was very unfulfilling for him. It was miserable the entire time he was there. It wasn't his typical combat deployment. He didn't have any of the outlets he normally gets when he's on those. And he came home miserable from that. And I guess you would say that, like, he was not happy with his return because we had a miscommunication where we were surprising him and he thought we weren't going to be there and we were there. So I think it led to some feelings that it brought up in him of like abandonment and maybe a lack of safety for him. So that was not the best emotional reintegration into our family. We got over that, or I thought we did, but I think it resulted in some lingering tension for him. His grandfather had a massive heart attack and died, and he had to go see his family, which is a big trigger for him. And then he came back, and he was XO of his battalion, and then he was passed over on promotion, the promotion board. And that was just a major, I think, like lead into a spiral for him. He had already been sort of spiraling. You could see it in his eyes, and he was shutting down big time. He was a pretty big avoider. So he would come home and just rage the second he would get in the door. And it was kind of at a point where you couldn't say anything subjective, even like, oh, it's a nice day. And that's not even, you know, then he would tell you all the reasons that that was not an accurate statement. The kids were basically at a place where they didn't even want to come downstairs if he was home, or they would ask if he was off that weekend. And, you know, when the answer was yes, they were disappointed, not happy. He would work till 7:30 or 8, and they were glad he was not home in the evening. And then he would just come home and sleep, like pass out in the chair or on the couch. And then it was like eat dinner, and he would go to bed. And he was gone to the gym before everyone got up. It was just, he was just completely shut down in our life. And when he wasn't shut down, he was angry. So there was no reaching him. And he just kept spiraling worse and worse and worse. And then we lost our dog, who we'd had since the first month of our marriage. And I think that was just like the straw for him that, and he like, I mean, he just turned off. Like, you could almost not even, you could look at him and it's like he wasn't even there. He had to start new medicine for his migraines, and he was just so completely disconnected and apathetic. And our friends kept saying, you know, it's just his PTSD, like, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. And it just kept getting worse. And then someone, a civilian, showed up at the battalion, and she was, I guess she just offered someone who was going to tell him everything he wanted to hear at that point. So it led to basically giving him like a tool for his self-destruction, that he was, this path he was on, self-destruction. He didn't care about anything anymore. So he decided it was like not just going to be a bottle of booze or, you know, putting a gun in his mouth or whatever. He was just going to destroy everything, like career, family, everything he could. And so that was his tool for destruction. He didn't really care about that either, just utilized whatever was there. And she was this thing that was like offering, instead of someone who's going to tell him the truth about things, right?
Right.
it's the one who's going to say everything you want to hear when you don't want to hear the truth. So.
Right. So for you, Krista, what was the worst part of that for you? So something that occurred, and you were saying, and again, we're here to talk about to have this safe conversation with everybody to understand the impact of trauma, PTSD on not just the military member, the Marine member, but also how it is impacting the wives and the family, which brings up so much other pain and shame and fear.
Right.
And so what was the worst part of that for you coming in as you were observing him going through all that?
The whole experience was horrific. It's like you see this person drowning in front of you, and you're trying to help them or even just reach them. It's like they're in another dimension or something.
Right.
And instead of, it's like they can't even see you or hear what you're actually saying. And when you try and talk to them, they turn you into a monster, and they become horrifically abusive. It's like they'll tell you the most hateful, horrific things you can possibly imagine. And trying to love somebody through that is very hard.
Yeah.
And then you try and fight for them, even when you're not sure what's happening.
Right.
You think you know, but they're very, they find a way to lie and make excuses for their behavior. And they create this situation that they're telling everybody. And it makes you look crazy instead of them. And that's even more abusive because it alienates you, who they're victimizing. And it makes it so you're just like, you don't have anybody to talk to anymore. Right. Or you don't have anybody that you can go to for help because they already have everybody at work. They already have a whole battalion or unit behind them. They have all their buddies there. And then the few people that you felt like you could count on or rely on, they start, spinning things and flipping a script and planting little seeds there that just twist everything in a way that makes it seem like you're making things up or you're blowing it out of proportion, or they would never do that. And because these people have only seen them in a way that they want them to, they've never seen them behind closed doors, or they've never seen them when they're triggered or when they're in those places, but they surely have never seen them act in this manner because none of us ever thought they would do that. They think he's right. She's probably just being crazy. There's no way this is happening. And there's a name for that, right?
Yeah. Well, we call it gaslighting, which is a denial of your own reality and experience, right? You're pointing out you're trying to lean. It sounds like what I hear you saying. You're trying to lean in and point out, hey, here's some issues, problems, and then they flip the script. Now you're the problem for pointing out the problem, and so it gets into that whole deny and attack, reverse victim. Now you're the offender of that story, right? So something happens, and then that kind of flips. So here's where something in that moment happens, right? Where there's this violation of of connection or expectation that our partner's going to be there to offer comfort and caring in times of, let's say, danger or distress, or right. And so something in that snapshot moment, Krista, that event changed everything between you. What changed?
Everything in your life changes.
What changed?
Everything that you think is real, everything that you think is safe, everything that you thought you could believe in is gone. It's gone. It's like if you're standing and a sinkhole opens up beneath you and you're just being sucked in and buried alive, and you can't find air or light. It's the worst thing.
There's no oxygen in the room. There's no light. So in that moment,
you don't have a choice because you have kids.
Yeah. Now this is where we get stuck in a bit of what I call a double bind, which is kind of like you're saying, you said he was drowning, right? And as a wife and partner, right, because you're there to take a stand to answer that $96 million question that we all are asking is, are you there for me? Can I count on you? Do you matter? Are you safe? Are you accessible? Are you going to emotionally engage and respond in a caring way, right? That question. But that, if it comes back yes, right? Safety, security. But something happens when it's a no or uncertain, it creates all this uncertainty. And I remember you saying it just broke you. And never again could you trust him. In that moment, everything redefined the relationship as insecure, shattering the attachment bond. Is that right? So? Going from that,
absolutely.
Yeah. So there is this one, to kind of give an example here. There's a Zen story, which is a good illustration of these double binds, and also a unique solution that you took yourself to begin to source and resource solutions for this. There's a Zen master who says to his pupils, he says, if you say this, let's say whoever your person is, if you say this stick is real, I will beat you. If you say this stick is not real, I will beat you. If you say nothing, I will beat you. So there's this, it seems like there's no way out of that trauma bond, because the drowning person, it doesn't matter if you're drowning at 1 feet, 7 feet, or 21 feet, you're drowning. And the drowning person takes control precedence in that snapshot moment. So that's where it goes. So the story goes on with one pupil, and this is where you took on another level. One pupil, however, found a solution by changing the level of the communication. He walked up to the teacher, grabbed the stick, and broke it. That was necessary for you to survive.
Right.
And for this family, your marriage and this family to survive. Right? So talk to me a little bit about that I'm gonna call it an attachment injury, where there's this violation of this expectation for comfort and caring. And it sounds like everything you try to do or say, there was this where your partner was not able to respond or failed to respond in these times of urgent need.
Right.
Go ahead.
His shame, I think, is like so all-encompassing that it keeps them in this place of massive defensiveness. And what you put this word to, for me, that was immense for our whole marriage, and it was grandiosity, right? And so it kept him in such an abusive place that it wasn't, even after he really didn't even want the affair or any of that was done and over with, but he couldn't stop the abusive behaviors. And in some ways they intensified, because in his mind he could just fix everything by that stopping and just professing how much he loves us, and we had to just fix it that way. But that's not how you fix things. You have to actually like become something better. You have to grow from experiences in life, or you're not changing. And there was no real sense of this different man, because everything was still about him. And anytime the pain would come up for me, for the kids, for anything, he would still do the same thing, and it was flip the script. It was the Darvo, and like defend himself, attack, and reverse it and make it about himself. And it's so mentally and physically exhausting and draining to live in that. And it just feels like it's never going to end. You keep explaining to them what they're doing. You can even point it out in the moment. Like, you are doing it right now. It's happening. You're saying these exact things. And you realize at some point that it doesn't matter what you do, what you say, they're not going to change on their own. Or they're not going to change because you want them to. They're not going to change because the kids want them to. It has to come from this place inside that, like, nobody can bring out. They have to do it because there is like true deep change in there. And I just finally told him, after I actually started doing a lot of meditating on my own, and that's a big thing in meditation, is releasing attachment, right? Like, that's what you focus on. And I realized that that was what was keeping me in such a dark place, was my attachment to him. And I couldn't get better if I stayed attached to him, emotionally or physically or spiritually, like attached to him. And I told him, like, finally, I said, I have to release my attachment to you. I have to. Like, I literally told him those words. And I said, I want the best things in this life for you. I will always love you, but I have to want that for myself too. And I want it for our children. And so I have to break that attachment, or else neither of us can get better. And of course he panicked. It was a major panic moment for him. But I did that. I set major boundaries for myself. I just made sure that, like, you know, separated our room, kept my distance, and I just kind of shut down a little bit on him. I guess I flipped that script a little bit, but it was real. It was, I needed that distance in that space.
And this is going to be really important part of one of our segments, is going back to that Zen, is to break that stick, to break the attachment, right? That's already been broken. But to kind of speak to this for you, Krista, and everyone out there that are listening to these podcasts, because that what Krista's pointing out is what I call the signature move of gaslighting, is the Darvo, the denying, the attacking, the reverse victim, and then you become the offender. You're the one that's doing that. Because the inability to validate another person's experience is extremely painful, because being understood is one of our deepest psychic cravings, or deepest needs. We don't really need to know that we're right as much as we need to know that someone understands how we feel and what our reality is. And making that connection with each other is called empathy. It's compassion. And when we feel a certain way, we need to know that other people can validate our experiences, meaning that they know and understand how it is for us. So we need that love, that listening and understanding and validating, which is really hard. As Chris is saying, there's that part of there's two positions here that we get into. We get the one down position and two one up positions, right? Which is the rescuer victim, and the one down is the rescuer perpetrator, and the one down is the victim. And we all end up in the powerless, helpless victim role anyways, because you're trying to rescue and you're getting this experience because it's the altruistic part of the rescuer, and you have the perpetrator, the blamer, and you drop down into the victim, which is really shame, and then the other part up here is the grandiosity. And as a guy who has been in the military, who went into the military with my own aversive childhood experiences, trying to avoid, my own shame and find significance and belonging in a family, a tribe, the military, because we all kind of learn to develop these very high thresholds for pain and suffering, which keeps us in denial of reality of our own experiences and the experience of those around us. So going back to that drowning person that's taking control precedence and taking on everything in that moment becomes the focus, becomes the double bind, and what I'm going to call an emotional contagion or affect contagion, which we'll talk about some more, which is basically, let's say, Krista, let's say that you're walking through a forest, right? And there's a woods, and you see a bear. And that bear, now your brain, your limbic system, and your nervous system goes into that fight, flight, freeze, right? So you're either going to fight the bear in that moment, you flee, you run away from the bear, or you play dead, you freeze, right? That's adaptive. Because when you're walking through the woods or in a forest and there's a bear, that's how you should be responding, right? And when you have trauma, though, where it's chronic, that's like military guys, if they go off to war and they're not chronic, there's the bears everywhere, danger, 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 right? Or you come home. Now, but what if that bear is now living in the house with you every single day and there is no escape? There's no way to flee, right? So that alarm for you keeps going on and on and on. So let's say that alarm in your chest it's good, right? The alarm's good. It's there to protect you, keep you safe, to let you know when there's danger, danger, danger. So if, let's say, however, that someone is breaking into your house or your car, but the alarm does not go off, and it should be going off because there's danger, right? So that's kind of the disassociating part of the trauma. PTSD is one thing, is disassociating, and it creates this, and you can see when you talk about him kind of going into this other world, this other person that you don't even know isn't there. It's like they're detached from their own reality and experience. Or it's set too low, right? The alarm's set way too low, and the wind or another car drives by, and that alarm is always on. It's always going danger, danger, danger. And now the impact that has on your nervous system, and you talked about this with the immune system, with a lot of people that are going through this, the autoimmune system begins to get impacted because you have this adrenal fatigue, the high cortisol levels, stress, all this stuff going on, and you're watching and scanning the room looking for the bear.
Right. And
right.
I think
so
it's
talk about that.
Double.
Yeah, the double
I
bind.
think it becomes a situation of, I think I talked to you about this the other day, where in a lot of military families, it becomes a situation of like hurricanes and tornadoes colliding.
Yeah.
Because they are looking at, they come home and their alarm system is probably too high, right? Everything is triggering them,
right,
including their families, who are happy they're home, but they're also have their alarm systems all of a sudden on high because this hurricane just came into the house with their alarm system on high. And everything you do is triggering them. So you never know when they're going to be able to readjust that. And sometimes it's pretty quick, but other times they come home and it's been 6 months or it's been a year and they are still overreactive, and you've become this problem. The kids are a problem. Everything is a problem. and it's a constant rage. But, you know, you're also just feeling so sick all the time.
Yeah.
The kids are sick. Everyone is sick because you're exhausted. It's like a massive mental and physical exhaustion to walk on eggshells around really the actual bear in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you feel like you become this tornado of anxiety and anticipation, wondering when that hurricane's going to attack. And you never know if it's going to be a category 1 or 5, or if it's just going to be a tropical storm. Maybe it's not going to be that bad. And you're just constantly mediating and moderating and, you know, trying to balance everything out. But in doing that, you're sacrificing your entire well-being. And it's so exhausting.
Right. And that becomes kind of the control of everything, because you have the immovable object and the unstoppable force, right? So it's, do you ever take your kids out to play whack-a-mole at Chuck E. Cheese or Dunkin'? Yeah. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole, right? It's like the first 5-10 minutes is fun, right? But now you get into that day after day after day after day after day, and you're knocking down every compulsion, every impulse, every, you know, scanning, trying to knock all those things down. There's the what I call your 4 F's of control when they're trying to control, and it's the fear of knowing, okay, when's the unpredictability of that, the lack of safety, uncertainty, confusion, all that's going on. And then the frustration, right? Because you're trying to knock all that down and it's impossible and it's frustrating. And then there's fatigue and the exhaustion of the burnout of the adrenal glands and adrenal system and the nervous system, because PTSD, I prefer to call it as PTSR, which is post-traumatic stress reordering of the brain, of the nervous system, of the hormones. Everything that's occurring within them is also occurring within you. So that becomes the primary PTSD person and what we call like secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. And like you were saying, if we also have our own aversive childhood experiences or trauma or abuse, you know, that's also the collision course, the perfect storm, like you said, the tornado and the hurricane, kind of getting all tanked into this vortex of pain and confusion. So it's kind of like, so if you've been in the, you know, if you've ever had someone in a bad mood and all of a sudden it seems like everyone around you is in a bad mood. I remember before I understood all this affect contagion stuff and emotional contagion, I would, because that gets caught by other people, I would walk, I'd walk in my own house back 20 some years ago when my kids were just little, and I'd have this angry look on my face, and I'd have I'm a big guy, and so I have my face would kind of look mean and upset, and then all of a sudden my kids would run off into their rooms. I'm going, what's wrong with them?
Yep.
They're all avoiding me, ignoring me. Why aren't they just coming and giving me a hug? Because I'm coming in this room like a bear, like a tiger, bristling, right? And it's this contagion that you're talking about of that until we understand how that is impacting others, you know, I think a lot of times this is really hard for people to do it, because these all, whether it comes from the conscious and unconscious acts of, you know, sharing this stuff, it becomes part of the thing, because these mirror neurons in the brain are responsible for this thing. So, because when you see your partner in that vortex, right, going into that downward, you call it the downward spiral of drowning. And as a partner, what is it you want to be able to do? I mean, you're seeing him drown. What's your inclination? What do you want to do?
Well, I mean, I think honestly, in the moment, you have multiple emotions, right?
Yeah.
You're, especially, well, in the beginning when you're not exactly sure what's going on because they're lying about everything,
Right.
but you do know something's wrong.
Right.
So and they're still being horrific anyway, but you're thinking, you love this person, so you want to help them or save them, right?
Yeah.
And then part of you is angry at someone, like,
Mm-hmm.
how can you treat me this way? Like, I don't even know what's going on. Part of you is like, who are you? I
Mm-hmm.
don't even know who you are. So
Mm-hmm.
there's like denial of this existence that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then part of you also is like, hates them at the same time. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
I've realized, like, in this whole time that we've been going through this massive process of like recovery and healing, that like, you don't have to, like, hate is definitely not the absence of love.
Right.
It's like
Indifference.
apathy or
Yeah.
indifference.
Indifference, apathy. Yep.
Because I've definitely expressed to him how much I hate him multiple times during this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, that's so mean. How can you tell me that? And I'm like, well, Matt, there's not exclusive of each other.
Right.
Um,
And I
but
remember telling him, I said, that's actually in a really good place if your wife hates you right now,
yeah,
because she still feels something for you.
right.
I said, because it goes through one of the things that you and we all work through, and I work through these attachments systems, the operating system that relationships go through, is, when you first get into these attachment injuries, there's a attachment protest, right? And the protest is an anger of hope rather than the anger of despair. The anger of hope is, there's hope here, right? There's this hope that we are going to make this better.
Mm-hmm.
That there is hope, that there's a belief in our bond and our attachment that can bring it back to good. It's like the good, the bad, the ugly. The good times you had, and you're trying to get back to that good time. And then you have bad times, which all marriages go through bad times, right? And they'll get most of the time they get back to good. But in these trauma experiences where there's a betrayal of trust or abandonment in these crucial moments of need, right? This specific incident, which one partner is either lying, inaccessible, unresponsive, in the face of your urgent need for support and caring, rather than, and the ability to do the reality testing, perspective checking, because that's the denial denies your ability to do the reality testing. Hey, what's going on? And that relationship trauma then defines relationship as being insecure, and that single shattering events, that sudden snap of that bone, that stick, now has disproportionate influence and changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is left unresolved, okay, and it stays in the ugly, and there is no reparation back to good, these attachment injuries block the repair process and prevent the development of getting back to trust and that safe and secure bond and secure base. And the guys have got to know, your partner is the Marines get this, right? They understand attachment bonds. They understand the attachment, that sense of belonging, because what's one of their mottos? A Marine will never leave another Marine. Well, your wife is your secure base, is your number one person who will always have your back, no matter what. And you're turning the gun on your partner, and that's when it becomes injurious, because there is no resolution. There is no repair back to good. Does that sound right?
Right. And I actually had an epiphany at one point, when we were going through all this, and I was reflecting on his childhood and how he behaved as a kid. And he was always a really angry childhood,
Mm-hmm.
but he also, I think he had some attachment issues with his mom. She was not very nurturing, and kind of, as soon as the next kid came along, she just kind of would push the other one away. Didn't matter how old they were. There was not a lot of love to be spread around. So I think he had some abandonment stuff there
Oh,
too.
sure. Yeah.
And so he would push and test those, boundaries. Like, how do I get attention? A lot. And usually it was by like throwing a temper tantrum, right? Like, if they're not going to give me positive attention, I'll throw a temper tantrum and I'll get attention that way. And I kind of feel like whenever that's like a pattern for him, if he's feeling any sense of stress or abandonment or perceived abandonment, right? Like all of a sudden, everything he thought he believed in, like this institution that was like Big Daddy and this thing he's believed in for a very long time, he's been really putting before his family, before our marriage, before his kids, before everything he's dedicated his whole life to, all of a sudden tells him he's not good enough, which goes back to his shame injuries from being a child. Well, and if he's thinking any of the stress from the last year, or he's questioning, are we going to abandon him too? What's the first thing he's going to do? And he throws a big, like, adult-sized temper tantrum, and subconsciously, I don't think he did it intentionally, but he tests people his whole life. He's a big tester of things. And it really, like, there's clearly no intent to follow through with anything. So it was like, I feel like it was this massive testing of whether I would abandon him, where my allegiance was, and, like, how far can I push you and get your attention and see if you love me, that sort of thing.
Right. And that's where, going back to some of the things, and this is one of my core beliefs and a bias I have when I'm working with couples and attachment stuff and working through trauma-informed attachment relationship work. This is such a key thing that you're bringing up, because like we said, there's the attachment, protest, right? Are you there for me? Can I count on you? Do you have my back? Does that matter? Are you accessible, engaging, responsive? Are all those things happening in that snapshot moment? And if it's a yes, then we can breathe and the nervous system can relax and we're okay. And then if it's a no or uncertainty, then it goes to more of a protest. And then it goes to this kind of idea of a depression, despair, hopelessness, powerlessness. And if that doesn't eventually get back to good, you go into what you said you had to go into, is a sense of detachment, right? You detach. And I remember telling your husband, I said, hey, that anger is actually, this is good. She's still connected here. But the moment your woman detaches and goes to indifferent, it's done.
Right.
The light goes off, and and that getting back to that reparation and repair is extremely difficult, because now there is no trust, and trust is that important thing. So my bias, and when
was no trust, there's
still no trust.
I don't think that's
ever
I don't think trust can be dangerous, though. I mean, in all honesty, like, I think I've learned that to an extent, like, especially maybe women.
Yeah.
Because we're built to, like, build families and whatever, maybe we give that away too easily. And in friendships even, or in marriages, or even just amongst coworkers, I think men can be better about guarding against that. But women tend to trust people too easily.
Right.
And I think that a relationship needs to be built on actions first. And, trust is something that maybe you have to constantly evaluate whether it's deserved.
Right.
And I don't know if we do that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about trust. Trust is, I think a lot of times people give away trust that hasn't been earned, right? And trust takes time and experience to build, right? And to experience. And it takes years to do that. And it takes one thing to destroy it. So it comes in like mud, goes out like water, right? It's one of those things that, but this trust, and this is where the repair process, the reparation back to good is this is where I work with couples. So how do you restore, repair trust in a relationship where it's been broken? And a lot of guys come in and they've betrayed the trust, or women too. It happens both ways. And they just want them, just trust me. No, that doesn't happen, because trust is built through like these sliding door moments, right? And it's these incremental, it's not the big overtures in these big monumental things. It's the small, tiny turning, either you're turning toward, turning away, or turning against. Turning toward, turning away, or turning against. Because you got to go through the atonement, the actual attunement of what happened, and to reattach. You just want to get back to attachment, and you haven't done any atonement, which is restoring of trust. So all these sliding door, turning toward moments of reparation, of repair. And what does that look like? Openness. And then I always say this with my military men and veterans and first responders, it's learning to take the mask of the masculine off, taking the mask of that invulnerability off, to be able to lean in and to create to be trustworthy, transparent, vulnerable, right? In the military, vulnerable is, that can be a scary thing, but vulnerability is a military term that goes back to way back when the knights had to walk into a room and take off their breastplate to expose their heart, because that's the word there, to have courage to be vulnerable, right, to expose themselves. And the military looks at also vulnerability when you're up on a mountain. Are you going to be threatened that way? Or if you get stuck in a valley, you're vulnerable in those places, right? So this is the thing that I impress upon couples, of giving them a path and a roadmap back to trust. And it's going to take time and experience for that trust to be restored. Does that make sense?
Right. And I told him, like, hands down, there's no more boxes in there for you. Like, I know that this is how he learned to survive or get through his life, and then through the years of leaving and coming home and dealing with there and having to bring that back here. But I said, there's no more compartments in our life. There's no more room for that. You're not going to put that in a box, or put us in a box, or me in a box, or there's no more boxes. None.
Right.
Like, they're gone. If I sense any boxes being created or walls being reestablished, like, I'm gone. There's no more room for any of that. Like, the one and only massive mistake has been made, and there's also no more room for you to stumble. Like, my boundaries are pretty set now. Like, I am not making concessions anymore or excuses for him, which I think I did for our whole marriage, right? Because it's been a full wartime marriage of his trauma. I mean, I can look back and of things that happened right after his first deployment to Iraq, and the way he started numbing immediately upon that return, which you addressed in some of your previous podcasts, but things he hadn't done when we were dating. But then he comes back and is just full blown in shutdown numbing mode.
Right.
And we had to overcome in just the 3 months he's home before he leaves again for another, combat deployment. And then he comes home to a brand new baby. And we never had a life where you could truly heal or find that common ground and grow together. But it was, I told him, like, I know what I deserve and what I need and want in this life now. So you're either going to show up 150% every day for these kids and for me, There's no more avoiding. You need to like put it out there. You need to share your emotions and your feelings, and you need to be there for us in our pain.
Right.
And you need to be able to understand it, or this is not going to work.
Right.
And that's like,
that's where you had to walk up and take that stick and break it and say no more, right? Because I'm not going to be right. And that is such a challenging thing. I know you've been into all these groups and therapy, and you see this occurring in other marriages and wives, and this ongoing drama triangle that people can get into, and there's got to be a point where you just say you have to stop, and there's got to be that boundary, and that boundary is two things. It's either boundaries, psychic boundaries. I'm going to protect myself from the world, and I got to protect the world from me. And that's the part where when you have this type of trauma, you're constantly trying to control the world and then all that lashing out and anger and hypervigilance and disassociating. And when we numb out our positive emotions or negative emotions, we're also numbing out our positive emotions, because that's the shame part where it corrodes their belief that they could actually change. And that becomes the thing. So going back to my bias, because then we're going to get into talking about where we're going to go from here. So my bias is, and you've heard me in my other podcasts, and I say this all the time because I believe this is true, from all my 25 years of research, is that, and I have talked about it, that we are born into, like your children, we're born into this sense of love, connection, and belonging, right? To feel that significance, right? That sense of belonging is what we are born into. And then we learn relationships through relationships, like your children are learning we learn how to live, and we live how we learn, right? So all that modeling that we talk about in some of our childhood stuff. And I don't spend a lot of time there. It's just creating an awareness that there are all these little imprints and impacts on our adult stuff. And then we get broken and wounded in relationship. And I've heard you say this: broken people break people, and hurt people hurt people, right? And so whether it's trauma, abuse, neglect, violations of human connection, whatever that is where it is what we continue to reenact as unconscious attachment, trauma, bonds, loops, unconscious attachment, injuries. And then the good news is, I believe, because that's where we were wounded, right? That's where we can be healed in the context of a relationship. But it's going to mean really looking at what happened and how do we begin to work through that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the thing that, like, men who are maybe suffering from PTSD or something, and I know we started this way and then maybe didn't quite fully express this, is that if they, or a female, if they do this in their marriage, create this kind of betrayal, this massive violation of trust, they're actually causing the exact same disease or situation for their spouse.
Yeah.
They're putting the same exact situation that they have been living with for all those years. They are now putting the exact same, terror, trauma, all of those same things, anxiety, fear, shame, the absolute worst shame you can ever imagine, putting on another person.
Right.
They are doing that to their spouse. So whatever they expect of them to forgive them for,
right,
they just unloaded all of that pain onto that person.
Right.
Fear, anxiety, everything. That's what that person has to live with now for the rest of their life.
Right.
And anything that they move forward with. So all the nightmares, all of that trauma, all of the anxiousness and the attacks and the sweats and all of those things, it's the exact same thing.
You're taking on that
you
too.
Caused that.
Yeah, you're bringing, yeah, and we're taking it on too, right? So it goes back to, again, that break in the bone, right? So we have to go back and look at where that break in the bone is, because that's where. So let's say you, me, all of us, that's that little 7-year-old, and let's say that you get handed this very difficult life, love, challenge, calculus. It's a calculus problem that you're supposed to solve for X. Something happens, a break. And now you have a story about what happened, but you don't have even the 5th grade level fractions, decimals, integers, algebraic reasoning to solve for this calculus problem, to solve for X, right? These complex emotions, these are, we'll just use that as an analogy for our emotions, this calculus problem we're trying to solve. So that little boy, that little girl learned to solve for X using skills. So they avoid, they hide, they go to their closet and hide out, they get angry, they turn to false solutions for a real need for connection, love, right, belonging, by turning to drugs, alcohol, pornography, sex, or whatever. I mean, that was what we had to learn to numb that negative emotion to survive in the family. And now we are handed the same exact calculus problem, because that worked, but it didn't work. It was functionally dysfunctional, right? It didn't work, but it worked to numb,
survive, yeah,
to survive, right? And now you're handed the same problem in your work, at that need for belonging, that fear of abandonment, or you come home, and all that stuff continues to be reiterated in the dance within and between.
Right.
Because I say you're broken 3 ways: within, and me, you, and between. Just the third person is a space between, and that's the part that continues to get injured. And what you did was successful, was to pull it back. Instead of getting caught up in that vortex and that trauma loop, you had to do something really significant, and was probably very scary for you too, to even push off and from the drowning person and say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to learn how to swim on your own.
It is scary, yeah, because you don't know how they'll respond, as far as, especially when you're dealing with someone who has trauma, right?
Yeah.
Like PTSD, you don't know what that's going to trigger for them.
Right.
So that could go very badly. But at the same time, like we talked about, you and I, at some point you have to decide, like, you can't carry them on your back anymore.
Right.
So it's because it really does start killing you.
Right.
I mean, you've been doing it for so long, and at some point it's so mentally exhausting for you, especially after the betrayal trauma has caused you, that you are drowning in a place that you never think you can be either. And so one of you has to decide, like, to stand up and stop drowning, right?
Right.
So if it's always been you to do that, then it still has to be you to stand up in that one. So, you know, like, we have 4 kids, and they are the best thing I've ever done, and they always will be. They are never going to be something I stop fighting for. So it's like, whatever has to be done right now, if that means this is not ever going to be a thing, I still want the best for you. And I need to this has to be done. If you get healthy and we're in a good place, then maybe that's a possibility down the road, but you know, you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
So
and, I have a question for you, Krista. Do you believe any couple going through this can do this alone?
No. Well, I think that if they have the right professional support, possibly. But I think that you also need some good, solid friends,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's one set or two sets, that you can really trust and that you can talk to, who aren't afraid of your pain.
Right.
And that is not necessarily going to be the people that you think it is.
Right.
There are very few people, whether it's this or maybe, I think maybe even a death in a family, or those massive life experiences that terrify people, that make them realize, like, this could happen to me and I never want it to. There are very few people who can, like, walk through that fire with you and still be by your side.
That's
and
right.
You will realize that when things like this happen in your life, you'll see who's still standing there with you and who's not. And sometimes your family isn't standing there with you afterwards. And that's hard. Like, when you go through life events like this, you lose more than just the original idea of, you know, the white picket fence and the house and the 2.5 kids, whatever, Hollywood
the dream.
movie. Yeah. Even if you grew up in a broken home and with, you know, massive traumas in your childhood, you still have this idealized thought about your life because you were doing it better in your mind, you know? But you lose more than that. You will lose, the ripple effect is massive. It's massive.
Right.
So I don't think people are prepared for that.
Right.
And if you get stuck in that, and if you can't release those attachments, so it's not just one attachment you'll have to sever. You have to be prepared to say, okay, like, I need to let go of that. I need to let go of that. I have to let go of the dream I had for this retirement, or the dream I had for, you know, my parents, having a, you know, lifetime relationship with my parents, or with this sibling, or with this friend. Like, there are so many attachments that you have to be willing to reflect on, and even maybe reflect on if that was even a healthy relationship, friendship, whatever, in your life before. Like, you can't just look at the other person and think about what was unhealthy in their life. You have to look at yourself.
That's right.
And reflect on all of that.
Right.
And break all of those sticks too.
Yeah, right. Well, it's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. And I think there's also, and I think what I try to help couples get into with what you're talking about there is, this is really about grief. It's grieving the loss of the ideal, grieving the past, grieving the present, grieving the future, grieving the loss of all those things. And, you know, the stages of grief: denial, anger, depression, despair, all the bargaining that you have going on. And you get into
massive amounts of that.
And that's complex grief, which is part of the trauma and the grieving. And then you get into acceptance, the good and bad. If you can get beyond that, into the acceptance, the forgiveness, and letting go where you need to let go. And I just always say, don't cut it off. This is the process. This is the crucible. It's the perfect gift, and just the, you know, right blessing for us to all grow and learn. But because I think there is a grief process of, like you said, grieving the loss of the ideal, grieving the loss of the dream, past, present, future, grieving the loss of the family. And to help people connect to that, there are, I think, 39 different emotions, and we only talk about maybe 3 or 4 of them, right? And grief isn't one that we talk about, which is very complex because it involves, you know, denial, anger, you know, depression, you know, the bargaining, you know, all that stuff, which is also, none of us have really learned how to grieve well and say goodbye well too, right? Because it's just one way or the other, black and white. Does that make sense?
And I think that if we can teach our children something for a healthy life, is, when you're angry, why are you really angry? Like, what's driving your emotions? If you're afraid, what are you afraid of? If you're feeling like, identify your emotions so that you can walk through them and not just react to them. I think that our generations were not really even encouraged to feel our emotions. It was kind of like, you're fine, just keep going. And maybe even we started to parent our kids that way. Like, okay, it's fine. I don't see any blood. Brush it off. Keep going. Or you're going to be fine. Like, everything's cool. I don't even know why you're upset right now. We all still fall back and do those things. But then if we can actually talk to them, it's usually not even what's presenting itself that's bothering them. It's something else. And if we can get our kids to talk now, then we won't have adults who aren't telling each other what's wrong. Maybe we won't have adults who get married and won't talk to each other about what's bothering them, you know, 5 months later. I don't want to have 3 boys who shut down on their wives and don't want to communicate to them. And I don't want to have a daughter who's wild and crazy in her teenage years. And, you know, I want to have kids who can be there emotionally invested in their life, not just trying to be, you know, honor grads and becoming doctors and lawyers. That's not even important to me, really, anymore at this point. I just want them to be good human beings who are giving back to the world and can be emotionally present in all of their relationships. So I think a lot of things are put into perspective when this sort of thing happens. I don't care if they get into Duke or into Princeton or what SAT scores they get, you know, in 5 years. I just want to make sure they're going to be solid people. And that, I don't want this trauma to affect them for their whole life.
Right. To learn from this and to grow from this and that'll be a really good conversation with our, you know, because I always say life's made up of tasks and relationships, because a lot of the relationship part gets ignored and the emotional part gets shut down, and then you have all sorts of other symptoms and problems going forward. So that'll be a good conversation for us to have. So Krista and I are going to be facilitating and co-facilitating a safe conversations dialogue with both on Camp Pendleton and off base with other military veterans, first responders, those with PTSD, marriages, families. Anyone's invited into this conversation to have these safe conversations. As we say, talking is probably the most dangerous thing you can do, but listening is one of the things that we can will help us all heal and learn how to get into the healing path. I always say relationships a path and a practice. It's the vehicle that's going to get us back home. So, all right. Well, Krista, thanks so much. It was
Thank
really
you for having
good.
me.
Yeah, well, we'll set this up again and we'll keep talking. And I think people are going to get a lot out of this. And do you have anything, last comments or ideas?
No, I just hope people learn that they have help and support out there through you, through your website, through friends, and don't let yourself drown, not at any amount of water.
Right.
Not for any sort of trauma in your life. Like if you know that you're still dealing with something that happened when you were a child, or, you know, you call them adverse childhood events. Aversive childhood experiences, trauma. Yes. Or if you're still dealing with issues from war and it is affecting your family, which I guarantee that it probably is, then please get help, because your family shouldn't be suffering. Like, I feel like the war does not need to continue at home. Yeah. My saying is, if we're going to heal the war in the world, we have to heal the war between the sexes. And if we're going to heal the war between the sexes, we have to heal the war within ourselves. So finding Joe and
and these podcasts can be helpful. You can find me at my phone number is 310-560-0726. I am here to help. I'm here to guide and give you a tribe and a place, a safe place, a secure base that we can all have these conversations and not just survive, but thrive in our relationships, marriage, family. So thanks again, Krista.
Thank you.
You're welcome.